I watched from the upstairs window of my home in Guelph as my oldest son, Mark, pulled his $90,000 BMW into the driveway. He didn't come to see how I was doing. He didn't come to check on my heart condition. He came because the property tax on his condo was due, and he expected me to write the check. Downstairs, I could hear him talking to his brother, Kevin, on speakerphone. "The old man is slowing down," Mark whispered, his voice cold and clinical. "The lawyer said if we can prove he's not mentally fit, we can take control of the shops in Toronto by Christmas. That's $3 million in equity just sitting there." I looked down at the documents on my mahogany desk. A new will, a trust, and a termination of funds. They thought I was a senile ATM. They forgot one thing. I built this empire with a welding torch and bare hands, and I was about to burn their inheritance to the ground. My name is Thomas. I'm 68 years old now. If you looked at my hands, you'd see the story of my life. They are covered in faint white scars from welding sparks and calluses that 40 years of labor refused to wash away. I wasn't born with a silver spoon. I didn't have a fancy university degree. I had a 10th grade education and a back that didn't know how to quit. I spent my life as a silent provider. In my world, love wasn't expressed through hugs or long talks. It was expressed through the wire transfers I sent every month from Toronto back to the village. I believed that if my wife, Catherine, had gold jewelry and my sons had the best private schools, they would know I loved them. I was a master welder, and I've worked on the skeletons of the skyscrapers that define the Toronto skyline. I've stood on iron beams 50 stories up in minus 30-degree winds, just so my family could live in a house I had never even slept in. For 30 years, I lived in a basement apartment and ate bread and lentil soup while they lived like royalty in a mansion I paid for. I thought I was building a legacy. I thought I was protecting my blood. I didn't realize I was just fattening up the wolves that would eventually try to eat me alive. The first year I arrived in Canada was 1984. I landed at Pearson International Airport with $80 in my pocket and a heart full of hope. I thought I would find a job in a week. I was wrong. Because I didn't have a Canadian trade license or connections, nobody would hire me. I spent those first 3 months sleeping on the concrete steps of a church in downtown Toronto. I didn't have a blanket. I used my thin jacket to cover my chest and tucked my boots under my head so they wouldn't be stolen while I slept. I remember the winter of '85. The wind coming off Lake Ontario felt like 1,000 needles hitting my face. There were days I went 48 hours without a single meal. I would drink hot water from public bathrooms just to feel something warm in my stomach. But every time I felt like giving up, I looked at the crumpled photo of my son, Mark, in my wallet. He was only 2 years old then. I told myself, he will never sleep on a sidewalk. He will never know what it feels like to be hungry. By the second year, I got a break. A Greek man named Elias ran a small welding shop in Scarborough. He saw me standing outside his gate every morning at 6 a.m. One day, he handed me a torch and pointed to a broken trailer frame. "Fix it," he said. I didn't just fix it. I welded a seam so perfect it looked like a string of silver beads. He hired me on the spot for $10 an hour. To most people, that wasn't much. To me, it was a fortune. I worked 14 hours a day. When the shop closed at 6 p.m., I started my second job as a delivery driver for a local furniture store. I slept 4 hours a night. Every Friday, I went to the bank and sent 80% of my paycheck home. By 1990, I was a master welder. I had bought my own truck and started taking private contracts. I sent home enough money for Catherine to buy a 3-carat gold necklace and a plot of land. I was proud. I felt like a king. I went back home for a visit in 1992. I expected a hero's welcome. I expected to hold my wife and have my son run into my arms. But when I walked through the door of the house I had paid for, the air felt cold. Mark, now 8, looked at me like I was a stranger. When I tried to hug him, he backed away. "Did you bring the Nintendo?" he asked. Not, "How are you, Dad?" Not, "I missed you." Just a demand for a toy. And Catherine? She was distant. We slept in the same bed, but there was a wall of ice between us. She was always looking at the door, always checking the time. That was when I first noticed her cousin, David, a 19-year-old student she claimed was staying nearby for his studies. He was always at the house. He was always helping her with the groceries I paid for. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I was just tired from the decade of labor. During that trip, Catherine became pregnant with our second son, Kevin. I thought, this is it. This will save us. A new baby will bring the family together. I went back to Toronto with renewed energy. I took out a loan and bought a small commercial building on Bloor Street. I worked even harder. I was sending back $5,000 a month. When the time came for the family to join me in Canada, I spent $15,000 on visas, flights, and a new apartment. I went to the airport with balloons and a heart full of joy. But when Catherine walked through the arrivals gate, she was only holding Kevin. "Where is Mark?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He didn't want to come," she said, not looking me in the eye. "He cried and said he wanted to stay with my father. I couldn't force him, Thomas." It was a lie. I knew it then, and I know it now. Now she left our oldest son behind as an anchor, an excuse to fly back and forth, to keep her life with David alive while I funded the entire operation from 5,000 miles away. She stayed in Toronto for 2 months. I gave her a luxury life. I took her to the Eaton Center and told her to buy whatever she wanted. I bought her a $4,000 designer watch. I took her to the finest restaurants. But her eyes were always on her phone. She was always texting her mother or checking on Mark. One night, I woke up at 2 a.m. and saw the glow of her phone under the covers. She was whispering. I couldn't hear the words, but I heard the giggle. It was a sound she hadn't made for me in 10 years. When she insisted on going back to take care of Mark, I didn't fight her. I let her go. I even bought the return ticket. I told myself that if I just built more wealth, if I just became more successful, she would eventually see my value. I spent the next 15 years in a trance of work. I bought more property. I built a portfolio worth millions. I was a success by every Canadian standard. But in 1998, the final blow came. I had been away for 18 months straight, working on a massive pipeline project in Alberta. I hadn't seen Catherine in a year and a half. Then she called me. "Thomas," she said, her voice flat, "I've given birth to a daughter." The silence on the line was deafening. I looked at the calendar. I looked at the date of my last visit. "It's been 18 months, Catherine," I said. "How is that possible?" "The doctor said it was a late pregnancy," she stammered. "She wasn't growing right at the start. It happens." She thought I was stupid. She thought, because I didn't have a university degree, I didn't understand basic biology. Everyone in the village knew. My parents knew. My neighbors knew. The girl was David's child. And yet, she expected me to pay the hospital bill. She expected me to add the girl to my insurance. And like a fool, I did. I didn't do it for her. I did it because I was broken. I had spent my whole life being the provider, and I didn't know how to stop. I didn't know who I was if I wasn't the man sending the money. When I finally retired and moved back for good, I expected to finally enjoy the fruits of my labor. I had $3.2 million in assets, commercial shops, a residential complex, and a healthy retirement account. I built a separate, beautiful house on the edge of town, thinking Catherine and I could start fresh. Or I thought, maybe if the money stress is gone, we can find each other again. But she refused to move in. She stayed in the old house, the one David frequented. And my sons? They followed her lead. Mark was 30 now. I had paid for his tuition at the most expensive university in the country, but he had dropped out 3 times. He didn't have a job. He didn't have a plan. What he did have was a taste for Italian leather shoes and expensive cars, all paid for by the international wire transfers I'd sent for decades. One afternoon, I walked over to their house unannounced. I had bought a box of pastries from the local bakery, hoping to sit down with my boys and talk about their future. As I reached the front porch, I heard laughter from the living room. "When is Dad coming over?" I heard Kevin ask. "He'll be here at 6, Catherine replied. "He's bringing the money for your business startup." My heart soared for a second. They were waiting for me. They were calling me Dad, the term of respect for a father I hadn't heard them use in years. I reached for the doorknob, but then I heard a man's voice, a younger man's voice. "I hope he brings cash," the voice said. "I need to fix the transmission on my truck." "Don't worry, David," Mark laughed. "The old man is a walking ATM. He doesn't even check the receipts. Just tell him it's for educational materials or business permits. He loves that stuff." I froze. My hand stayed on the cold brass knob. "He's so desperate for us to love him," Catherine said, her voice dripping with contempt. "It's almost sad. He spends 40 years in the cold, just so we can stay warm with David. He's a good provider, I'll give him that. But he's a boring man. He smells like grease and burnt metal." I didn't open the door. I turned around, walked back to my car, and sat there for an hour. The pastries sat on the passenger seat, getting cold. I wasn't their father. I was their financier. David was the father. David was the one they laughed with, the one they respected, the one they called Dad. I was just the man who paid for the privilege of being ignored. A week later, Kevin came to my house. He acted like the perfect son. He sat on my sofa and told me he wanted to open a wholesale mobile phone business. He had a business plan, 3 pages of nonsense he'd clearly printed off the internet. "I need $85,000 to secure the storefront and the initial stock, Dad," he said, looking me straight in the eye with fake sincerity. "I want to make you proud. I want to be a businessman like you." I knew he was lying. I knew the money was likely going to pay off David's debts or fund a vacation for the 3 of them. But I wanted to see how far they would go. I wrote the check. "Thank you, Thomas," he said. He didn't even call me Dad when he had the check in his hand. He used my first name, like I was a business associate. 2 weeks later, the wholesale business hadn't opened. Kevin stopped answering my calls. I drove by the address he gave me for the shop. It was an empty lot. I found out through a neighbor that he had taken the $85,000 and bought a luxury boat, which he kept at a marina 2 hours away so I wouldn't see it. He and David were out on the water every weekend. The only person who stayed by my side was my daughter-in-law, Sarah. She was my brother's daughter, and I had arranged for her to marry Mark, hoping she would bring some stability to his life. She was a kind, hard-working woman who saw exactly what was happening. One evening, Sarah came over to bring me dinner. She saw me sitting in the dark, staring at a photo of my parents. "Uncle," she said softly, "you need to stop." "Stop what, Sarah?" "Stop giving. They aren't waiting for you to come home, Uncle. They are waiting for you to pass away." I heard them talking at the dinner table last night. Mark was calculating the inheritance tax. He's already contacted a realtor to sell this house the moment you're gone. I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. Even Catherine? Sarah looked down at her hands. Catherine told them that since the daughter isn't yours, she needs to make sure the boys get the lion's share before you get smart and change the will. She's worried you'll find out the truth about David. "I've known the truth for 20 years, Sarah," I whispered. The betrayal was complete. My wife had used my body and my youth to fund her life with another man. My sons had been raised to see me as a resource to be harvested, not a human being to be loved. They had no idea that while I was boring and smelled like grease, I had spent 40 years reading contracts, managing investments, and learning how the world really works. They thought I was a simple welder. They forgot that a welder knows how to join things together, but he also knows exactly where to apply the heat to make them fall apart. That night, I didn't sleep. I went down to my basement workshop. I grabbed my old welding helmet. I didn't have any metal to join, but the smell of the shop cleared my head. It reminded me of who I was. I wasn't a victim. I was a builder, and it was time to build a new future, one that didn't include them. I pulled out my laptop and logged into my banking portal. $3.2 million in total value, $450,000 in liquid cash. I picked up the phone and called my old friend from Toronto, Howard. He was a high-stakes estate lawyer who had helped me with my commercial properties on Bloor Street. "Howard," I said when he picked up, "it's Thomas. I need to make some changes. Big changes." "How big, Thomas?" "I want to disappear while I'm still standing in the room," I said. "I want to see their faces when they realize the ATM is permanently out of service." Howard arrived from Toronto 3 days later. He didn't come to my house. I met him in a quiet corner of a Tim Hortons on the edge of town. I didn't want any prying eyes. I didn't want Catherine or David seeing a man in a $2,000 suit talking to the simple welder. "I've reviewed your portfolio, Thomas," Howard said, laying out a spreadsheet. "You've done well. The 3 shops in Toronto have tripled in value. The residential complex is generating $12,000 a month in net profit. Total valuation is sitting at $3.25 million, plus your RRSPs. I nodded, stirring my black coffee. "And my current will?" "As it stands, 50% goes to Catherine and 25% to each of your sons. The daughter gets nothing because she isn't legally listed as your heir in the current draft. If you die tomorrow, Mark and Kevin walk away with nearly $800,000 each. Catherine gets the rest, not including this house." I looked out the window. A young man about Mark's age was walking by, laughing into his phone. He looked happy. He looked like he actually liked his father. "Change it," I said. My voice didn't shake. "I want to create a trust, the Thomas Chen Legacy Trust." "Who are the beneficiaries?" Howard asked, pen hovering over his legal pad. "My daughter-in-law, Sarah, and her young daughter. They get 90%. I want the funds managed so Sarah gets a monthly stipend and my granddaughter's education is paid for in full, any university in the world." Howard raised an eyebrow. "And the boys? And Catherine?" They each get 5%, I said. But there's a condition. They only get that 5% if they vacate my properties within 30 days of my passing or a triggering event. Otherwise, they get zero, not a cent. And what's the triggering event? I'm going to sell the commercial shops to the trust for $1, I explained. I'm transferring the titles this week. On paper, I will own nothing but the clothes on my back and a small pension. I want to see what happens to their love when the bank account reads zero. Howard smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. You're cutting off the oxygen, Thomas. They'll starve. No, I corrected him. They'll just have to learn how to hunt, something I should have taught them 30 years ago. For the next 4 hours, we mapped out the legal fortress. We set up the trust so that it was ironclad. I also had Howard draft gift revocation letters. In Canada, if you give a gift under certain pretenses, like a business loan for a shop that never existed, you can sometimes fight to claw it back if fraud is involved. I wasn't going to sue Kevin for the $85,000 yet. I was going to keep it as a loaded gun in my desk drawer. As I drove home, I felt a strange sense of peace. For 40 years, I had carried the weight of 4 people on my back while they kicked my ribs. I was finally stepping out from under the load. When I walked into the kitchen, Catherine was there, looking at a travel brochure for a cruise. Thomas, she said, not looking up. David's truck needs new tires, and the girl needs braces. It's going to be about $6,000. I need you to go to the bank tomorrow. I looked at the back of her head. The woman I had sent gold to. The woman I had worked in the freezing rain for. The bank is closed, Catherine, I said quietly. Then go Monday, she snapped. And while you're there, Mark needs to talk to you about his investment in that crypto platform. He needs another $20,000 to cover his margin call. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just smiled a small, sad smile. I'll see what I can do. I went to my room and locked the door. I had work to do. I had a trap to set. They wanted a father who was only good for cash? Fine. I was about to show them exactly what happens when the cash runs out. The following Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I invited the whole family to the big house for dinner. I told them I had a major announcement regarding the future of my estate. They all showed up. Mark arrived in his BMW, Kevin in his new boat-towing truck, and Catherine brought David, who sat at my table as if he owned the chair. Even the girl was there, playing on an iPad I had bought her for Christmas. They were all smiles, the kind of smiles people wear when they think they're about to win the lottery. The dinner was catered. I spent $1,200 on the finest steaks and wine. I wanted them to have one last taste of the life I had provided before I took the plate away. As the plates were cleared, I stood up at the head of the table. I tapped my glass with a spoon. The room went silent. As you all know, I began, my voice steady, I've spent 40 years working. I've built a portfolio worth over $3.2 million. I've reached an age where I want to see that money put to good use while I'm still here to witness it. Mark leaned forward, his eyes gleaming. That's wise, Dad. Really wise. So, I continued, I met with my lawyer, Howard, this week. I've made some final decisions. I pulled a stack of envelopes from my jacket pocket. I handed one to Mark, one to Kevin, and one to Catherine. David reached out his hand, but I ignored him. Go ahead, I said. Open them. The sound of tearing paper filled the room. I watched their faces. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. Mark was the first to speak. What is this? A notice of asset transfer? Thomas, it says here the Toronto shops have been sold to a private trust. It says you don't own them anymore. That's correct, I said. The trust is the legal owner of all my commercial and residential properties, the rental income, the equity. It's all been moved. Kevin turned his paper over, his face reddening. And the cash? The RRSPs? On this says the accounts have been closed. I've used the liquid cash to pay off the remaining mortgages and fund the trust's initial capital, I explained calmly. On paper, I currently have a net worth of about $14,000, just enough for my funeral expenses and a few months of groceries. Catherine stood up so fast her chair scraped harshly against the floor. You old fool. You can't do that. That's our money. You promised the boys they would be taken care of. I did take care of them, I said, looking her in the eye. I paid for Mark's 3 failed degrees. I paid $85,000 for Kevin's wholesale business that turned into a boat. I've paid for David's truck tires and your gold jewelry for 30 years. The debt is settled, Catherine. Who owns the trust? Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Who did you give it to? You didn't give it to some charity, did you? I looked toward the kitchen door. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, was standing there holding her daughter. She looked terrified, but she didn't look away. The trust belongs to Sarah and her daughter, I said. They are the sole beneficiaries of 90% of my estate. Sarah has proven herself to be the only person in this family who cares if I've eaten or if my heart is beating. She stayed while the rest of you were busy spending money I hadn't even earned yet. The room exploded. Mark called me every name in the book. Kevin threatened to sue me. David actually stepped toward me, his fists clenched, but I didn't flinch. I was a master welder. I'd faced fire hotter than a 19-year-old's temper. Sit down, David, I said, my voice dropping an octave. You're a guest in a house that technically no longer belongs to me. If you touch me, I'll have the police here in 5 minutes, and I'll make sure they look into the loans Catherine has been taking from my accounts to pay your gambling debts. Howard has the forensic trail ready. David froze. He looked at Catherine, then at the floor. As for the rest of you, I said, looking at my sons, there is a final 5%. Each of you has been left a small portion, but there is a condition. You must leave this house and the other residential property by the end of the month. If you fight this in court, or if you harass Sarah, that 5% is automatically forfeited to the local children's hospital. You're destroying us, Kevin yelled. How am I supposed to pay for the boat? How is Mark supposed to pay his condo fees? Sell the boat, I said. Get a job, Mark. Use those degrees I paid for. Or ask Dad over there for a loan. I hear he's great at spending other people's money. Let's see how he does at making his own. I walked over to the sideboard and poured myself a small glass of water. My heart was thumping, but I felt lighter than I had in decades. The silent provider is officially retired, I said. Dinner is over. Please leave. I'd like to spend the evening with the people who actually love me. Catherine was crying now, not out of sadness, but out of pure, unadulterated rage. You'll die alone, Thomas. No one will come to your funeral. I've been alone for 40 years, Catherine, I replied, even when I was sitting right next to you. The only difference is, now I don't have to pay for the privilege. They left. They slammed doors, they cursed my name, and they sped out of the driveway, leaving black tire marks on the pavement I had paid to pave. When the house was finally quiet, Sarah came over and sat beside me. She didn't ask about the money. She just took my hand. Are you okay, Uncle? She asked. "I'm better than okay, Sarah," I said. "I'm free." The aftermath was as cold and clinical as a Canadian winter. Mark and Kevin tried to fight the trust in a Toronto court, but Howard had built a fortress. They spent $40,000 on legal fees they couldn't afford, only to have the judge dismiss the case in less than an hour. The judge looked at my sons over his spectacles and told them that a man has every right to leave his hard-earned money to the only people who showed him an ounce of loyalty. And Mark lost his BMW. He couldn't make the payments, and the repo man took it right out of his driveway on a Tuesday morning. He's now working as a junior clerk at a firm he used to mock, earning $42,000 a year. Kevin had to sell the boat for half of what I'd paid for it. He's currently working shifts at a warehouse in Kitchener, moving crates, the kind of labor he once said was beneath him. Catherine's life took the hardest turn. Once the money dried up, the romance with David vanished. He didn't want to be a caregiver or a provider. He wanted a lifestyle. When her cancer diagnosis came 6 months later, David stayed for 3 weeks before packing his bags and moving in with a woman 20 years younger. He took the truck I'd paid for and never looked back. Catherine reached out to me crying. In asking to come back to the big house, I didn't say yes, but I didn't let her starve. I instructed the trust to pay for her treatments at the Princess Margaret Cancer Center, exactly $115,000 worth. I paid for her care, but I never visited. I am still a provider, but I am no longer a fool. I live in a modest townhouse now, near the water in Barrie. I sold the big mansion and added the $1.8 million proceeds to Sarah's trust. I spend my mornings teaching my granddaughter how to build things, small wooden birdhouses for now. I'm teaching her that you don't get anything in this world without a steady hand and an honest heart. Sometimes I sit on the pier and watch the sunset over Lake Simcoe. I think about the 40 years I spent in the heat and the cold. I don't regret the work. The work made me a man. I only regret that I didn't stop being a bank account sooner, so I could start being a person. But I'm at peace. My legacy isn't in the buildings I welded or the shops I bought. It's in the quiet life I've built with the only daughter I ever truly had. And for the first time in 68 years, when someone says I love you, I don't have to wonder how much it's going to cost me.